Well, welcome everybody to the beginning of a brand new collection of sermons that I must tell you, I am so excited for us to journey through together. It's the start really of a brand new season together as a church, as a community. Those of you watching online, listening to the podcast, connected into what God is doing through believing. We are starting a new collection of sermons we are calling Do It Anyway. Some of you are like, that sounds aggressive. I know. I think that's why I like it. Do it anyway. You know, Jesus called people to do hard things. Some of us, our perception, our thinking, our understanding, our hope for Jesus is that he's going to just, only tell us to do the things we want to do, only call us to do those things that we would enjoy doing. But that's not how Jesus operates. When you read the scriptures, the instruction of God sometimes pushes us, sometimes asks of us, sometimes calls us to difficult, to uncomfortable, to things that kind of make our skin crawl and our stomach turn over. But because he said it, we are to do it anyway. Because the scripture admonishes us in it. Because it says, this is what it means to please me. This is what your neighbor needs. This is what would be good for people that bear my name. We do it anyway. And my hope and prayer in this series is that you will be pushed in maybe some uncomfortable areas of your life. Pushed in your faith as there are aspects and lanes that would be very easy to skip over or to pass by. But you would be pushed to do it anyway. But not just in this because God says so kind of way. Although quite honestly, that would be enough. Whether we like it or not, whether it was good for us in some way, if he said it, we are to do it. But my prayer through this series, through each and every week of it, through each and every sermon within it, that you wouldn't just be pushed to do it anyway, but you would see and begin to experience the goodness, the blessing, the promise on the other side that quite honestly, we typically can't see from this side. See, through this series, I believe the Holy Spirit is going to convict us, challenge us, call us. He's going to correct some things on the inside of us. And my prayer is that as that change begins to happen, as that conviction, that calling, that correction begins to settle and move us, that we would begin to see the reason why. The blessing and the promise and the opportunity available to you and to me on the other side, if we'll do it anyway. And so in this series, if you hoped that today we were just going to sort of warm up and get into the idea, and then maybe in a subsequent installment really deal with some difficult, you judged wrongly. We are jumping all the way in right off the beginning. We ain't wasting no time in this series because time is short. It's of the essence. And today, I must implore us with the call of God in this vein to forgive. To forgive. To truly forgive is one of the hardest things that human beings are ever asked, required, or needed to do. But yet it's not up for discussion. As people of God, as children of faith, as followers of Jesus, it is not up for our discussion, our questioning, I would like you to know all the reasons and then figure out whether or not I should forgive. No. That is not our response. That is not our option. We are called to forgive. Jesus would put it this way, recorded by the gospel writer Luke in the 6th chapter, 37th and 38th verses. It's written this way. Jesus said, do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will it be poured into your lap. For with the same measure you use, it will be measured back to you. Now, these are the words of Jesus, but I must help you to know that the clearest understanding of this text is probably not the most common. Now, if you're new to faith, you're new to church, maybe you're joining us for the first time, and you're watching this, somebody sent you this, and said, man, you need to listen to this. I'm so glad you're here. And honestly, what this verse, what these words of Jesus are saying are probably clearer to you than they are sometimes to some church people. Because sometimes church people have some experiences, they have some rhythms and some ways, and they be hearing things in a certain way, and it's not actually the best interpretation or the most clear interpretation of what is actually even being said. If you've been to church and ever heard these verses talked about before, there's a good chance somebody did it during an offering sermon. Now, around here at Believing, we don't have offering sermons. That's just not the way we do it. We teach and preach on generosity, on giving. We believe in that. If you have questions about it, you can ask about it. In the month of March, we're running a money class on Wednesday nights where we're going to help people win in their finances. Giving is an aspect of that. Like, we talk about giving a lot, but we don't take 10, 15, 20 minutes every week to preach on giving. But some traditions do. And if they do, one of their favorite verses to go to is Luke chapter 6, 37 and 38. And they skip kind of the first part and just start with the give. And it shall be given unto you. Heaped up good measure, pressed down, shaken together, will it pour into your lap. And while I understand the sentiment, and maybe there's even some truth there that if you give, God will take care of you. I do believe in the provision of God. I do believe in the blessing of God. I believe that I've never seen the righteous forsaken nor their seed bearing bread. But that's not the best, clearest, maybe most accurate, certainly intended interpretation of what Jesus said. Culturally, in Jesus' day, to speak of something in threes was significant. Anytime a teacher of any sort, any rabbi, was trying to really make a point, they would repeat themselves in threes. They would admonish it over and over and over again. Another Jesus-ism that's very famous is when he talks and tells three stories about three lost things. He's trying to communicate the heart of God towards God's children who are far from him, who are lost. So he tells a story of a lost sheep, followed immediately by a story of a lost coin, followed immediately by a story of two lost sons. And he does this to communicate the heart of God and to draw emphasis. It's not three separate stories. It's one gigantic story that has three separate little stories that make it up. It's a very common tactic. That's a better understanding of the tactic taken here. Because we are given three things. Give judgment, and judgment will be given unto you. Give condemnation, and condemnation will be given unto you. Give forgiveness, Jesus would say, and it will be given unto you. Heaped up good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will it pour into your lap. Jesus is probably not speaking here about contributing financially in some regard. Although, again, I don't think that's the worst interpretation, but I certainly don't believe it's the best. What he is calling you and I and those listening to him too is this idea that if you give judgment, you will get judgment. More than you could ask for, more than you could want, heaped up, pressed down, shaken together, will you find judgment in your lap. If condemnation is what comes out of you, condemnation is what will come for you. Heaped up, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will it find itself into your lap. But if forgiveness is what comes from you, if choosing to turn the other cheek, if choosing to release those who have wronged you from their wrong, forgiveness will find you. Heaped up, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will it be poured into your lap. Now, the trouble for us on today is this. You do not need a sermon on how to give judgment. You're doing just fine at that. Most of us are. We some judgy people, aren't we? You do not need somebody to preach to you on how to give condemnation, do you? Because quite honestly, condemning is one of your strong suits. You can condemn the mess out of somebody. What did they do? Let me get to work. But how do we forgive? What does it mean to forgive? What does it look like to forgive? What is required of me in forgiveness? Because quite honestly, many people have approached this subject matter and they've approached it wrongly. Many people have tried to instruct you, some well-meaning. Some of you got your understanding of what it means to forgive from your mama and your daddy, and your mama and your daddy wasn't bad people. They just didn't really know how to forgive. And so they passed that on to you, and you've been trying to make it work, and it hasn't worked. Some of you were handed it by a friend. You were handed it by some therapist. You were handed it by, and you weren't handed properly. So how do you forgive? What am I actually doing? And maybe better yet, as we begin, what am I not doing when I forgive? Well, if you're taking notes today, I would write this down. Forgiving is not forgetting what they did. That's impossible. When you forgive someone, you are not forgetting what they did. The line of forgiveness is not the fact that it has been erased from your memory. Although for some people, it's a little easier for them to forget. In fact, I know some people that quite honestly, when somebody has wronged them, they have this proclivity not to become bitter, but they actually will just forget the other person exists and forget the thing even happened altogether. And it's almost this like selective amnesia that helps them deal with the trauma of it. That's a great little tactic if that's for you, but a lot of us be remembering real well. That's the reason for some of you, you can't drive down certain streets in this city, because when you turn down that street, all of these memories and all of these wrongs and all of this terrible moment in your life wells back up on the inside of you. Forgiving is not forgetting. That's impossible. For most of us, you will always remember what they said about you. You'll always remember how in your moment of need, they discarded you. Forgiving is not forgetting. That's impossible. And forgiving, write it down, is not dismissing. That's unreasonable. To forgive is not to dismiss and act aloof like, well, it's not that big a deal. In fact, for some of us, this is our defense mechanism. We try to act like what hurt us deeply didn't hurt us that bad, and so we just try to dismiss it. And, oh man, it really wasn't that big a deal, but yet you've been thinking about it nonstop for weeks. It is unreasonable to think that what forgiveness asks and what forgiveness requires is this dismissing where I'm going to act like it wasn't significant. I'm going to act like it didn't hurt. I'm going to act like I really didn't take that into the core of who I was, like I took it into the core of who I was. Forgiving is not dismissing. That's unreasonable. And forgiving, write it down, is not condoning. Come on, you're taking notes in the online. Right? Forgiving is not condoning what they did. That's dishonorable. Some of you were handed an instruction that you're just supposed to be okay with it. That's how you forgive. That if you were to really forgive them, what you are doing is you're putting a stamp of approval that what they said, how they treated you, what they took from you is okay. No, friend, that's the furthest thing from the truth. It would be dishonorable of you to condone what they did. It is not you giving the okay that it's okay to talk about people like that. It's okay to treat people like that. It's okay to disregard people like that. That's okay. It's okay. It's not forgiving. Forgiving is not condoning, because that would be dishonorable. And forgiving, please write this down, this last one down. Forgiving is not burying what they did. That's combustible. Some of us were told to forgive and forget, but we can't forget, so we buried it. And we wonder why we feel like a ticking time bomb in certain situations. We wonder why when when realities in our lives start to feel like what they did in that moment, something on the inside of us begins to warm up, and it's like we're ready to explode. And it's not really the person that we're looking at. It's not really because of the situation that's in front of us, but it feels like there's something on the inside of us that was never put to rest, and we don't know what to do. But what we did is we buried the thing that we were supposed to forgive because we thought that burying it was forgiveness. No, burying it leads to combustion. Because you get the right situation again. You get the right circumstances again. The wrong thing happens to you at the right time, and the next thing you know, tick, 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 we explode. Those things are not what forgiving is, but yet the call of God, the admonition of Jesus from Luke 6 and throughout all of his teaching is about forgiving. Why? Because we need it. But also because it's literally the crux of our faith. If you're a Christian listening to me today, you're a follower of Jesus, you've got to understand and know, even if you're new to this, or even if you're very shallow in the waters of it, that the backbone of all that we believe is that we're able to put our faith on the grace of God, because he has paid the price for sin that was ours. He forgave us. Forgiveness is the backbone, the crux of our faith, and we need forgiveness. And God extends forgiveness to us. So we should be people of forgiveness. We should be people that extend far and wide forgiveness to others, but far too often we are not. We withhold forgiveness. Oh, we've got our reasons, don't we? We've got our particular ideas as to why I don't need to forgive, our excuses as to why I can't forgive them in there. Here's what Jesus would say to you and to that. Do it anyway. You say, but they hurt me. Do it anyway. They took from me. Do it anyway. They abused me. Do it anyway. See, the troubling thing that people of faith find themselves in is in this place where we have, for some of us, become okay and comfortable with receiving forgiveness ourselves. But we do not give forgiveness. We're takers, not givers of it. Are there people in your life who you ain't got to say their name, don't type their name in the chat, but you know that they do a really good job of receiving, but they're terrible at giving? They're fine to be the person who shows up at the party and eats all the food and drinks all the good drinks, but if they need to pick up the tab this time, they always have forgotten their wallet. Like they know how to receive, they don't know how to give. They know how to take the Christmas present, they don't know how to give a Christmas present. They know how to make sure people know it's their birthday coming up. They know how to receive. They know how to be blessed. They know how to have it come to them. They do not know how to give it to others. Can I tell you what I just defined as the majority of people of faith? Because there are many, many people who would call themselves Christians who have received by that moniker forgiveness, who do not know how, who consistently choose to not give forgiveness that they've received. You see, just because you've received forgiveness does not mean you know how to give forgiveness. And friend, we cannot be professional receivers. People who receive but don't know how to give like we've received. In fact, too many professing Christians are professional receivers of forgiveness. And that's why they become pitiful givers of forgiveness. We know how to receive it from God, but we don't know how to give it to our fellow man. And this was of significant importance to Jesus. Jesus, who embodied forgiveness, who lived for forgiveness, died for forgiveness, was resurrected for forgiveness, and is coming back for the forgiven. This was of immense importance to him. That's why in the book of Matthew, as it's recorded, one of his disciples asks him a question in this matter. And Jesus answers the question, tells a story, and then interprets the story, all in one fell swoop. I want to read it to you, and then I want us to learn how to do this thing called forgiving that is so difficult, that is so overlooked, that sometimes is called weakness, but it's anything but. Matthew chapter 18. Verses 21 is where we'll begin, reading to verse 35. Peter, one of Jesus' disciples, came to him and asked, Lord, how often should I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? 7 times? No, not 7 times, Jesus replied, but 70 times 7. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven can be compared to a king who decided to bring his accounts up to date with servants who had borrowed money from him. In the process, one of his debtors was brought in who owed him millions of dollars. He couldn't pay. So his master ordered that he be sold along with his wife, his children, and everything he owned to pay the debt. But the man fell down before his master and begged him, please be patient with me, and I will pay it all. Then his master was filled with pity for him, and he released him, and he forgave his debt. But when the man left the king, he went to a fellow servant who owed him a few $1,000s. He grabbed him by the throat and demanded instant payment. His fellow servant fell down before him and begged for a little more time. Be patient with me and I will pay it, he pleaded. But his creditor wouldn't wait. He had the man arrested and put in prison until the debt could be paid in full. When some of the other servants saw this, they were very upset. They went to the king and told him everything that had happened. Then the king called the man he had forgiven and said, you evil servants, I forgave you that tremendous debt because you pleaded with me. Shouldn't you have mercy on your fellow servant just as I had mercy on you? Then the angry king sent the man to prison to be tortured until he had paid his entire debt. That's what my heavenly Father will do to you if you refuse to forgive your brothers and sisters from your heart. This is undoubtedly a heavy story, a heavy word that Jesus gives. But we must remember, with the same measure you use, it will be measured back to you. Forgiveness is the heart and the calling of God. It is his desire for it to be embodied in those who would bear his name. And he can call us to forgive boldly. He can call us to forgive atrocities, to forgive things done to us that were not right, because he has forgiven so completely and so audaciously and so unrelentingly, you and I who believe. He has forgiven us so much. And that's why Jesus can say, that's why the scriptures can call us to do it anyway. Even though they took from us, even though they hurt us, even though they abused us, even though they went back on their word, even though they stabbed you in the back, even though they acted like that, he can call us to forgive them anyway. This is actually to be our response, whether we feel it or not. Whether it's convenient for us, feels good to us, is what we want to do, is what we think we ought to do. It's not up for us who are forgiven to decide. Jesus would say, do it anyway. Because forgiving, if we are going to do this, because we know how to give judgment and we know how to give condemnation, but we don't know how to forgive. Forgiving, please write this down today. It isn't about counting. It's about continuing. to forgive your brother or your, it is not about counting. You know how many times I've forgiven them? It's about continuing. This example here in the book of Matthew begins with one of Jesus' disciples, Peter, asking him a question. Saying, Peter, you brought me this wonderful question, and that's so great, because you think you're really doing something. I know this is what was happening in Jesus' mind as Peter is like, Master, how many times should I forgive? 7 times, which Peter thought he was doing something. Because culturally, forgiveness operated on a 3 strikes and you're out sort of metric. You were to forgive someone once if they wronged you. If they wronged you again, forgive them again. If they wronged you a 3rd time, they are done. So Peter really thought he was doing something by saying 7 times, like he's like, Jesus, I'm picking up what you're putting down. And Jesus is like, you have not even begun to understand. He tells him to forgive 70 times 7, which isn't to mean carry the 1 and 3 and 490. No. He's telling them in this to lose count in how forgiving comes out of you. But it's Peter who highlights an important reality for us in the nature of forgiving. In a nature, in a space where quite honestly you would and I would have to lose count. Because Peter asked Jesus, how many times do I forgive my brother or sister when they wrong me? He doesn't just mean that biologically, but he is indicating those who are close to him. How many times do I have to forgive people who are close to me? How many times do I have to forgive my neighbor, my coworker, my relative, my son, my daughter, my husband, my wife? How many times do I have to forgive those who are close to me? Because you know as well as I do that our forgiveness issues aren't with strangers. They're with people you're trying to love. I know we live in a day where people get outraged on the internet, but the truth is we don't know most of the people we are angry at. Most of the people who be hollering at one another from day and night online, the truth is they don't know one another. They know what their bio says. They've perused some posts, some tweets, and now they've made judgments, and they're gonna tell them what they think. Here's the truth. That's not where it's hard to forgive. Where it's hard to forgive is that person who you used to be in business with, and then they wronged you so egregiously, it took you years to get out of the hole that they left you in. Where forgiveness is needed is in family relationships. It's best friends who would spend years and years and years together. You go on trips together, you have birthday parties together, and then something happens, and do you have the wherewithal to continue to forgive them? That's where forgiveness is needed. Because nobody needs forgiveness. Nobody has forgiveness issues with people who do the stuff to us that makes us just a little mad, but then it goes away. Come on, we've all been cut off in traffic, haven't we? Somebody gets right in front of you. Your forgiveness issues are not with the person who cut you off in traffic on Sam Cooper just the other day. It usually would only affect you if it affects somebody you love. So several years ago, I picked my son up from school. And we were in the car. He was sitting in the back because he was little at this time. And he was sitting in the back, and we were driving to wherever we were going on one of our beautiful roads here in Memphis, Tennessee. And there was this fool driving around me at that time. I was in my lane doing what I do. I drive quick to fast, and I'm driving my quick to fast, and they come flying up right behind me and get right on my rear. And I'm like, what on earth are they doing? I'm just watching all this, and I'm just driving whatever. They get angry and decide to do one of those classic pass you in the turning lane. You know what I'm talking about? Where it's like you're kind of in the lane, the turning lane's right here, and they get around you to get in front of you, and he passes me and then slams on his brakes, to which I have to slam on my brakes, and now I'm getting hot and bothered, And I try to get over, and they get over, and they're doing all this kind of stuff, and I'm like, this is making me crazy. And they do one more of those, get in front of me, slam on the brakes, and I had enough. And so I just yell at this fool, and I had been bottling it up, and I've been mumbling, because that's what I do. I be talking to the drivers, telling them, but I just finally yell, "You stupid idiot!" I decided to take matters into my own hand. And I turned down the side street and I said, "I'm getting away from this fool. like I'm getting out of here. This dude is going to be the end of me." And I'm turning down my side street because I got my Memphis card. I be knowing how to get around. And so I'm going over to another lane to get to where I need to go. And as I'm driving in the car, I can hear this sound. It's and I'm thinking, I don't remember this sound in the song I'm listening to. And I look up in my rearview mirror, and there's my little son in the back seat, tears just coming down his face. I said, "Buddy, what's wrong?" Come on, parents, you know how you still got to drive, but you trying to carry your buddy. What's wrong? What happened? Everything okay? And it took him a minute because he was feeling it. And I said, "Buddy, what's wrong? Buddy, what's wrong? Buddy, what's wrong?" I did it so many times. And then finally he said, "You called me a stupid idiot." To which I was like, "No, it was that car." And trying to explain this to a little kid, but it's like, no, buddy, that wasn't you. But in his mind, he's the only one in the car. And the outside actions of this terrible driver caused me to holler at them. But yet, in hollering at them, my son thought I was hollering at him. And now I have a problem. And so I'm consoling him and trying to, "Oh, it's okay. No, it wasn't you. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have gotten mad, but they were just driving crazy and all this kind of stuff." And then he finally settled down. But here's the thing. Since that time, I've been cut off thousands of times. Baby, I drive in Memphis, like I have interacted with so many terrible drivers. But I remember that one because it affected somebody I love. See, the forgiveness issues we have are not with random strangers. They're with our neighbors. They're not with just people who we don't really know very well. They're with people who we've worked with for years. They're people who live in your own house. They're people who you share a family lineage. They're with people who you used to rock with, and then something happened. That's where forgiveness is needed. Forgiving isn't about counting, because that's what we do. I have forgiven them enough. Do you know how many times she has? Do you know how many times he has? Do you know how much we've done for them? Do you know how irresponsible? Do you know what she said about me? She thinks I don't know, but I know. Forgiving isn't about counting. Forgiving is about, because of who the person is, because of what the person needs, choosing to forgive over and over and over again. We keep on forgiving. See, what we are to do, we are to forgive as often as they need it. See, what you've got to understand is that what forgiveness will ask of you is sometimes to forgive the same person for the same thing over and over and over again. And I know we live in a society that likes to tell us to protect ourselves, but can I tell you a great way to protect yourself? If that person fills a role in your life that nobody else can forgive, can fill, it might be worth forgiving them so that you don't lose opportunity to have that in your life. I've watched best friends separate and never talk to one another again because something happened and one person wouldn't choose to forgive. But now you fast forward 4 years later and they still don't have a best friend. I've watched families separate because of the unwillingness of someone to forgive. And now it sounds big and bad to say, I don't have this, but the truth is you could if you would forgive. There are marriages that have split, relationships that have torn down, father, son, mother, daughter, mother, son. These relationships have disintegrated because people won't choose to forgive as often as they need it. Listen, people are flawed, and people are going to make mistakes, and you're going to make mistakes. And you're going to want somebody to give you forgiveness as often as you need it, so give them forgiveness as often as they need it. If you want them in your life, you're going to have to decide, even when they rub me the wrong way, even when they act the way they've been acting for years, and I think it's stupid, and I think it's selfish, and I think it's so entitled, you're going to have to learn to forgive them because they need it. 7 times, Jesus? No. Lose count. But you not only have to forgive as often as they need it, we are to forgive as often as we need it. See, there is some pain that requires forgiveness that isn't active, but the hurt is. It's not that you even see them very much anymore. Or it's not that they're even able to hurt you like they did anymore, but what they said to you and about you, how they abandoned you, how they recused themselves from your situation, it still hurts. And they may have forgotten about it. They may not have thought about what they did to you since then, but you haven't gone a day without thinking about it. You are going to have to forgive as often as you need it. See, the trouble is some of us want them to feel it and them to know and them to care and them to change, and them ain't going to. But for your own soul, for the work that God would have for you to do for others so that you could trust again, so that you could love again, so that you could be involved again, so that you could have friendship again, you're going to have to learn to forgive as often as you need it. You're going to have to look for ways and opportunities to forgive. Otherwise, opportunities and ways to stay bitter will find you. Jesus said forgiveness isn't about counting. It's about continuing. It's about losing count. And he said this, that forgiving isn't about requiring. Forgiving is about releasing. We've all made this statement. I don't care how young or old you are. We have all made this statement when someone wrongs us, that if they will, ... then I will. If they will own up to their mistake, if they will own up to how bad they treated me, if they will ask for forgiveness, I will forgive them. What if the master in Jesus' story from Matthew acted like that? What if he put a requirement on this servant who had borrowed money from him? Millions, this translation says. It's a modern translation. When you do the math, it literally becomes tens of millions of dollars. This unfathomable amount of money to be able to be paid back when you got this little servant dude making $15 an hour over here flipping. You ain't gonna ever be able to pay this back. But if the master would have put a requirement on them, you know who would have hurt in that? The master. Any condition the master would have put on the servant to receive forgiveness would have only hurt the master. And what you and I don't understand is that sometimes when people hurt us, when they wrong us, when forgiveness would be needed from us, we start putting conditions. If they say this, and if they act like this, and if they'll write me a letter, I want it in Times New Roman 12-point font, no double spell. Like if they will do what I believe is right, even though I won't verbalize it, but I believe I need, then I'll forgive them. The only person you're hurting in that is yourself. You think you're protecting your heart. You think you're protecting your future by putting all these conditions on it. But no, what you're doing is you are preventing forgiveness with those conditions. We tell ourselves that I'm doing this because I don't want to get hurt like that again. The problem is you're still being hurt by what they did, by all your conditions around it. Every single time, you better hear me. Every single time you say, if they will, then I will, you're making it harder on you. You say, well, what do I do? What Jesus said, release them. That's what the master did. The master released this. It wasn't because the servant got his act together. It wasn't because the servant paid half. It wasn't. He released him. He released the offense. You're going to have to let them go. To stop worrying about retribution. To stop worrying about revenge. To stop worrying about recompense. And let them go. Because that's when you find out that once you release them, their offense to you, their offense on you, has no power on you anymore. The problem is, as long as you choose not to forgive, you are empowering them in what they did to you. You're not just keeping it alive because it stays in your conscience. You are giving them the strength to control your mood, to control your faith, to control your belief about the future, to control the relationships you will allow in your life or won't allow in your life because you won't release them. Forgiving is about requiring something from them. It's about releasing them. See, I can't be mad about what you owe me if I've forgiven you. I can't be bitter about what you did to me if I've forgiven you. If I've forgiven you, then now how you treated me and how you weren't there for me and how you hurt me and how you lied and how you were deceitful and how you said you would be there and you weren't there. None of that can affect me because I have released you from it. The problem is some of us are still being hurt by offenses from weeks ago, months ago, years ago, decades ago, because we're choosing to hang on instead of releasing them. We've put requirements on them. But the problem is we put condemnation on us. Forgiveness isn't about requiring, it's about releasing. Forgiving, please write this down, isn't about deserving, it's about deciding. If you're waiting until they deserve your forgiveness, you're going to wait forever. The master in this story that Jesus tells decides to forgive his servant. That's the reason forgiveness is possible. Forgiveness wasn't possible for any other reason than in the heart of the master, he said, you know what? I'm going to choose to offer forgiveness to you. The opportunity had nothing to do with the servant's devotion, had everything to do with the master's decision. That's why the unforgiveness that servant who was forgiven of so much is so egregious that he would go out and find someone who owed him something. Because just like the decision to forgive was the master's to the servant, the decision to forgive was that servant to his fellow servant. You know, the only reason you and I can even experience forgiveness is because God decided. God decided, I want relationship with humanity so bad that I will make it possible for them. I will extend forgiveness to them. Because forgiveness is always a gift. If we're getting what we deserve, that's not generosity, that's payback. And the problem with some of us is what we have put in the drawer of forgiveness really is nothing more than recompense. What we say forgiveness will look like to us is really nothing more than payback. They took from you, you want it back. They said this about you, you want them to make it right. That's not forgiveness. To forgive is to decide, I am going to release them. I am going to let them, not based on what you did, based on what I decided to do. See, once you receive the gift that is forgiveness, then you can experience the gift that is giving forgiveness. You know, we talk a lot today about retribution and making things right. People spend a lot of time and energy trying to fix things, justify things, and I understand it to a point. We love to expose the wrongs and the atrocities of others, whether they are people close to us or people far from us, whether it's systematic or it's sister to sister. We love to talk about and bring to the light all that was done wrong. And please hear me, that has its place. But forgiveness has its place too. For your soul, forgiveness has its place. And some of us have been pursuing all these other things at the expense of forgiveness. And we wonder why when we find a little bit of freedom and a little bit of liberty and a little bit of whatever it is we want, it never seems to fill. Maybe it's because all of that stuff is nice topping if the base is forgiveness. It's a nice extra if the foundation is forgiveness. Because let me tell you today, friend, forgiveness fills what time cannot. One of the greatest lies people will tell you is that time heals all wounds. No, it does not. It blunts the edge of the sting, but it does not heal them. How do I know? Because I know people still mad at people who are dead. They've been dead for a decade and you're still angry. I know people who've carried grudges for 30, 40, and 50 years. And there's hatred in their heart. And you say, well, did that happen this morning? Did it happen last week? No, it happened in 1973. What? Because forgiveness has a way of filling the space that time cannot. Time's not going to allow you to forgive them. It'll blunt the sting, but you'll still be angry. And when you find yourself in situations that look or feel like, when you find yourself around people that seem like they did, that's the reason that the last person that walked out, you said, nobody's ever walking into my life like that again. I'm never going to trust again. I'm never going to love again. I'm never going to let people get close to me. And you are robbing yourself because you thought time would fill something and it won't. You're going to have to forgive them to have that space filled, because forgiveness fills what time cannot, and forgiveness fills, please hear me, what justice cannot. I am for justice, because our God is a God who is just. But one of the false pretenses some justice warriors run out with is that if I can get what I've called justice, then it will fill every void on the inside of me, and no, it won't. You can get justice and still be hurting. You can get justice and still be lost in your soul. You can get justice and still have gaps and spaces on the inside of you that need to be filled, that you thought would be filled with a verdict. You thought would be filled with a payment. You thought would be filled if they had to confess. You thought would be filled if everybody found out who they really were and how they really operate, and it won't. Forgiveness fills where justice cannot. That's why God calls us to be people like him who forgive. We've been forgiven of so much. Not because we deserved it, but because he desired to forgive us. The truth is, the people in your life who need forgiveness from you, they're never going to deserve it. But God will always desire it. They're never going to deserve forgiveness from you. But God will always desire forgiveness from you and from me. Why? Please write this last one down. Because forgiving isn't about them. Forgiving is about you. It's been said many times that forgiveness, to forgive, is to set a prisoner free and to realize that that prisoner was you. If you decide to forgive, if you decide because of the forgiveness I have received, I'm going to be a person of forgiveness, can I tell you what will be true of your life? You will be free forever. What you don't realize is that some of you are trying to find things from God that really he's put the keys in your hand now. The problem is you're not free because you won't forgive. You're not free because if you would learn to extend forgiveness with the same kind of generosity that God has extended forgiveness to you, you would find yourself so free because nobody could take from you. Nobody could stab you in the back. Nobody could turn that and hurt you because you chose in advance to forgive. That's the freest person in the world. It's the person who decides to forgive in advance. Because to withhold forgiveness is to drink poison and believe that they'll get sick because of it. But that's what you do. When you withhold forgiveness, you are drinking a poison, letting it infect every fiber of your being, but believing all along the way as you drink this in, they're going to be the one that hurts. Say, how do I know this? Man, I've lived seasons of my life unwilling to forgive, and I suffered for it. I'm not telling you this in theory. I'm telling you this as someone who has practiced this. I've withheld forgiveness and my mind was a wreck because of it. I've withheld forgiveness before in other relationships, not just that one, other relationships suffered because of it. Other relationships weren't able to even happen. There were people I could have and should have trusted, but I didn't trust them because I was still mad at them. Somebody comes into your life and they look, sound, feel, promise a little bit like they did, and now you push them away and you call it wisdom when the truth is the root of it is unforgiveness. Suffered in my spirit. There are times in my life where I felt really far from God. Even though I loved him, I'm serving him, I'm preaching for him, I'm doing these things. But there was unforgiveness in my heart. And I wanted to think that the problem was a sermon or a song, when really the problem was the sin of unforgiveness in my own heart. See, what's true of me was probably true of you. I wanted somebody else to suffer. And I have no idea if they did or not. They may not have thought it was that big a deal. Because that's the trouble with it too. Sometimes people will say things that will destroy your world and they'll forget that they even uttered those words, which makes it worse. Unless you choose to forgive. Because what I know is that I could want all day long for them to suffer, and maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But I know I did. And I know all your objections. I know you got thoughts. Some of you are ready to type an email and send it to me that you don't know what he did and you don't know how they hurt me. And I get it. And so does Jesus. And you know what he says? Do it anyway. They don't deserve it. Forgive them anyway. Because the misery isn't worth it. Hear me. The bitterness isn't worth it. The loneliness, the torture, it is not worth it. The punishment from God isn't worth it. You say, but punishment from God? I'm a Christian. I done prayed my prayer. This parable ends in a unique way. Remember Matthew, it starts with Peter asking a question to which Jesus tells him to lose count of forgiving. And then Jesus tells this long story about this master who forgave one servant of so much, but that same servant would go out and forgive his master. So the master threw that servant he had originally forgiven into darkness until that servant was able to repay, because apparently that's what mattered to the servant. And most people, when they teach and preach this sermon, stop right there. Because, well, Jesus, when he taught parables, shared parables, gave these stories, oftentimes he left them open-ended. Oftentimes he just sort of told the story and it's like, let the hearer understand what the hearer understands. But there are a few occasions, this being one, where Jesus explains what the parable meant. Which means to you and to me, we can't make the parable mean something that Jesus didn't say it meant. And it has to mean what Jesus said it meant, because Jesus was the one who told it. So it has to mean what he said it meant. And Jesus ends this parable giving its meaning. And he says, that's what my heavenly Father will do to you. Do what? Throw you out. If you refuse to forgive your brothers and sisters from your heart. Say, what is he saying? I think he's saying exactly what sounds so uncomfortable for you to hear. He's saying. Because he said what he said. He meant what he meant. And it seems pretty clear that according to Jesus, that if we don't learn how to take his forgiveness and demonstrate it to our brothers and sisters, that maybe, just maybe, the forgiveness we had hoped for from God, we thought we had from God, maybe we don't have. I know you prayed your little prayer, but Jesus said what he said. And more foundationally, here's what he's saying. Really forgiven people really forgive people. That's what he's saying. See, maybe this first servant who had this massive debt convinced himself that it was because of his pleading and it was because of his work and because of his potential. That's why he was forgiven. So he could still hold all of his people who had hurt him on the same line and demand from them and offer unforgiveness to them. And Jesus says, no, you cannot. Because the only reason forgiveness came to your house is because the master decided to forgive. And if that same type of forgiveness doesn't flow out of you, then maybe you don't need, want, or recognize that same forgiveness flowing to you. So friend, here's my charge today. Don't be so focused on the forgiveness that they need, but don't deserve, that you miss out on receiving the forgiveness you need, but don't deserve. Don't be so focused on your brother, your spouse, your sister, your cousin, your co-worker, your former employer, your business partner, your neighbor, your relative. Don't be so focused on what they did to you in the forgiveness that they don't deserve, that you miss receiving in its fullness forgiveness that you don't deserve. With the same measure you judge, you will be judged. Condemn, you will be condemned. Forgive, you will be forgiven. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for forgiveness that we do not deserve. And Father, I pray today in this, I know, heavy, but I believe holy moment, you will enable us to be ambassadors of your forgiveness and your grace. People who freely give forgiveness because we have freely received forgiveness. And Father, if there are people in our lives that we have chosen moment after moment, season after season, to withhold forgiveness from, I pray by the power of your Holy Spirit right now, you would convict us of it. Help us to respond to your forgiveness that we don't deserve by giving forgiveness to those in our world who do not deserve it. And find the freedom when we do it anyway. We love you. We thank you today for your grace and patience with and to us. We pray all this, Jesus, in your name. Amen.